Welcome to another exciting episode of Humanity 8.0, a podcast where we talk about our post-truth present and our transhuman future, with the aim of sketching out the outlines of what awaits us in the years and the decades ahead of us. This podcast is brought to you by Rokos. Companies with limited IT budgets and personnel can now get the same cybersecurity protection as big enterprises. Rokos' Secure Access Service Edge, SASE solution, with zero trust, provides enterprise-grade comprehensive cybersecurity so that you can focus on your business. For more, please visit www.rokos.com. That's ROQOS.com. And now, here's your host, Dr. Ahmed Bouzid, founder and CEO of Witlingo.
It leads to my second question, or my next question, which is, okay, we have these suspicions. Most people are far more thoughtful than they're given credit for. Your average person, they can think on their own. They can think even, I think, ironically. I think they understand that Trump is son of a bitch, but he is a useful son of a bitch, right? They're not blind to his faults, but they, in balance, they feel that he is the man who needs to challenge this outrage out there. Anyway, so these folks, all of us, we have suspicions, and then we may even have such strong suspicions that we may organize against something that we feel is outrageous. So, for example, the war in Iraq, before there were massive demonstrations. I remember I participated in them, and across the whole United States, across the world, and these people, they were onto what's going on, right? And they organized and they voiced themselves and so forth. But then the invasion still went on, and the outrages that resulted still went on. The mass media, New York Times leading the pack, enabled these folks, right? In fact, I think it was in 2004, I have it here. Where is that? May 26, 2000, we probably can see it, but it's from the editors of the Times in Iraq. And here they blame the fact that they rely too much on Iraqi defectors and on the CIA for their stories and didn't question enough. Mea culpa, right? As opposed to doing their job, which is, where are these weapons that you're talking about? So I want to share with you right now, if it's okay. I was living in Philadelphia, and so I was reading the Philadelphia Inquirer. And I think I can capture the ethos of the mass media then with these cartoons. So I'm going to share my screen, okay? If I can. All right. I'm going to share my screen here. Tell me when you can see. Okay. Can you see?
I can.
Can you see this cartoon? I'm going to start from the beginning here. So this is October 1st, 2022. This is Tony Oth. He died in 2014. And the allegations were Saddam Hussein was, remember the time we gotta search your palaces, right?
Oh, yes, I get it. I get it.
We get it there, right? What else? Let me show you. I had like four cartoons from the time. So this is one. This is another one. The French. I remember the French were trying to avert war through some kind of negotiations, and the cartoonist is saying, "Look at the French. They love Saddam Hussein, right?"
Right.
This is completely in line with the Bush administration. What else? Oh, I need to share with you two more. I think it's worthwhile. This guy here. Look, this is the beast, and he's very threatening. He has his WMD, right? And then this one he has biological weapons and so forth. Now, they had zero evidence, right? Zero Zippo, right? At all. They didn't have anything. Okay. We're back now, right? Okay. Okay, we don't have the cartoons now. Okay, good. So it was for me, that was here's a cartoonist who otherwise was really, he was for the people. He was always criticizing the government for, domestic stuff and all that. But as soon as he became, and this is 2002, leading to 2003, the March, right? The invasion. was totally cheerleading, right? Without any evidence, right? Of course, he has the WMDs, even though we didn't have any evidence. Of course, he's going to use them. Look at him; he's a snake. He's an animal. He's irrational, and so on and so forth, right? And so for me, that war and how the media covered it, for me, it was a turning point in terms of understanding that these folks are completely in bed with the establishment, right? And then so for me to explain it, I have my own explanation, but I want to get a sense of what is your explanation of how, just take war in Iraq, how that how what was the mechanism that got some, a proud newspaper like the New York Times, who claims to be independent, the Pentagon paper and all that stuff. How did how did that happen? What was the mechanism behind the scenes that made that happen, without having to resort to a cabal of folks who want to go to war, which I don't think that's the case, as far as the New York Times is concerned. Tell me what do you think is the mechanism behind the scenes that made that possible?
There was a profound sense of impotence. The American population had and still to a great extent has a somewhat inflated opinion of itself and our nation, but that inflation is not entirely misplaced. And when the World Trade Centers were destroyed and something happened at the Pentagon, something horrible, uh, there was a sense that we have to prove our power, we have to prove our authority, and we have to find what, in fact, would be a safe, easily identifiable, and uh, defeatable target. We had already had a run-in with the Iraqi army in the invasion of Kuwait, and we annihilated them. And there's a road from Kuwait City to Basra, which was just a death camp, and it was almost like a weapons test. It's just like, see
It
how
was, of course, it was.
horrible we get. And then we killed all these guys, and all they were doing was trying to leave. But you were like, oh, we're gonna kill them anyway. And then were all these cries that we have to invade Baghdad. And so when the World Trade Center happened, that was the symbolic. First Tower 2 and then Tower 1. And there was also there was an attack at the Pentagon. And all of these things are now complicated, but I've studied everything I could find on the issue. But I think it was a sense of reasserting. The public wanted to reassert their national identity as the world power par excellence, almost a god complex. And so there was a religiosity about it. And you see this in political piety. Political piety is piety. Piety is simply obedience to the narrative because it's a narrative. And that can, of course, occur in a religion. It can occur in politics too. And what happened was we needed somebody to kill back. And of course, we went into Afghanistan. That was a mess. It was the whole Tora Bora thing, and we got to get Bin Laden, and that just became very strange. But I'm not going to go through that with you guys. If you want to look it up, look it up. I had no idea if Bin Laden was ever killed, but I think probably, although it was suspicious.
Yeah.
The way the body was disposed, and that was under, as I recall, Obama. Now, but the Iraq War, you see, when you attack Afghanistan, you're not really attacking a nation state. Yeah, Afghanistan is a loose coalition of different ethnic and tribal groups. And sure, you can go in there, and unlike the Russians, we succeeded quite brilliantly. By the time one of my friends was a veteran in Afghanistan, this was 6 years later after the invasion, the Afghans would not engage the military forces of the United States because they would be annihilated.
Yeah.
At least that was his explanation. They just were just waiting for us to leave, which eventually we did in perhaps a clumsy fashion. But Iraq entity, which was a nation state. Now, that was something that you could do between the concept of nation and the concept of nation. Here's a nation, here's a nation, this is our nation, boom. Let's knock that nation down and reassert our sense of supremacy, which is pretty well placed. I mean, I think Pax, the Peace of America, Pax Americana, has been a force for good, even though it's an extremely delicate thing when it's a balancing of weapons of absolute catastrophic power, nuclear weapons, biological weapons, chemical weapons. But what they call NBC in the military business. But attacking Iraq was a celebration of America. It was the 4th of July. Do you remember shock and awe? That we all tuned in. I was at my girlfriend's house. The whole family was gathered around the TV, and they're Iranians. Of course, the Iranians don't like the Iraqis, and that's another story. It's sort of like wondering why the French don't like the Germans. They're not the same. Iranians here, Iraqis over here. They had fought a very difficult World War I style war about a decade and a half before that. But we all gathered around the TV, and we waited for the video of these gigantic fire clouds rising into a dark sky. And the room just erupted in cheers. And I'm just kind of sitting there in the kitchen going, wow, this is orgasmic almost sexual pleasure in destroying another nation as the missiles came in from the missile frigates that launched them. And then it just went from there, air power, air power, air power. And this massive disaster. But the idea that this was a nation that we could wipe them out, like fly swatter them, restored the sense of American pride and security. People started, I mean, it was interesting. A quick anecdote.
Hmm?
For the first time in my life, I never had one of those American flag stickers on my car. I don't eat whatever, And I was in, and these things came out. And remember, the sticker was United We Stand. So ambiguous. They had printed these things up by the millions, not sure when or where to use them. And suddenly they appeared in the millions in convenience stores for free. And I'm going out to my little truck, my little Nissan truck. And this guy comes running out and he says, "You didn't take one of the stickers." I'm like, "Oh, well, I'll take it. That's fine." And he's like, "Put it on your bumper now." And I realized this United We Stand, it meant shut up.
Yeah.
Obey. This is us now. It's our team, their team, and we are one. And it was absolutely just, I was like, oh God, it's gotten worse than I thought. So I'm like, okay, I promise. And then this woman comes out of the convenience store, one of the other employees, and she's got an American flag sticker, and she doesn't even ask me. She just walks up to my car and sticks it on the back window. And all of a sudden, there were American flag stickers everywhere. It used to be an odd thing to see. It wasn't that people hated their country or anything. It just wasn't of interest. But this reassertion of nationhood, of unity. There was honestly, it was beyond romance. English is not good at explaining these things, but it seemed almost sexual that we were having, as they say, this orgy of nationality. And I think that's why it actually happened. And it definitely served the interests of the government, even though the evidence they had was slim to none. Somebody had to pay for 9/11, and we had found a nation state They could do it for us. It had already been kind of demonized. There was before that, there was already a stereotype about, Saddam Hussein's evil and he's having sex with the devil, South Park and all that stuff, and the South Park movie. And you're just going, this is crazy.
Also, it
But
was by that time it was a very weak, and I mean 10 years of surveillance and no-fly zones and boycotts and so it was they knew. I mean, the interesting thing is the United States seems to go attack only nations that are very weak, like Vietnam or Panama, or what is it, the other one, where Grenada, they invaded.
Yeah.
I think that was the only, I think between Panama and Grenada, those were the two successful invasions. But as soon as it goes, and then so I thought that Iraq was weak, but it wasn't weak enough because it has dragged them and caused, I don't know, $1 trillion actually, actual dollars, not accounted for, right? Meaning they were not budgeted for, right? I think Bill Crystal said, and I have the clip, back in, I think it was in February, it was in 2003, that it was going to be a quick 2-month war. Remember that? Cakewalk. It'll be a cakewalk. They're going to welcome us. We're going to just get rid of this Saddam Hussein, and then we'll be on our way. 20 years, not 20 years, 10 years later, I think we still had troops, and I think to this day, it lingers in terms of it's unstable, and it's an ally of Iran, all that nasty stuff that was completely predictable. I remember watching Colin Powell as he was doing his presentation with his little vials and showing that these are or satellites, right, and asserting that clearly they had weapons of mass destruction and they were moving them around. And I remember distinctly saying, who has a brain believes that? I said, there's no way. Clearly he was saying something that he was not sure of. I remember later on he said he was very ashamed of that. That was the most shameful moment in his career. But it was clear at the time for anyone who was not completely, sucked into this feeling of we were punched, we need to punch back. I think you could see that this was basically doing the very minimum that needs to be doing a story. It's minimally, at least on the surface, sounds coherent for the people to say, yep, clearly there is a potential mushroom cloud that may happen, and that would be the proof that he has what's her name, Condoleezza Rice. Anyway, the reason I brought that up really is, number one, I think for a lot of people who demonstrated and so on, it was clear that there was manipulation here. Once the war started, the dynamic changed, right? Because now you have to support the troop, which was an innovation. I remember in the first Gulf War, where I remember Bush said we now have kicked, I think it was Panama, whatever, kicked the Vietnam syndrome, right? Because before then, the troops were viewed as part of the bad system. And so I think the innovation was to say, okay, you don't agree with the policy, but support the troops, which puts people in a bind, right? How can they criticize, right? Which was a very genius move, right? And that's why when the war started, like you were saying, I think everybody had to go behind, behind the troops, and it was all about the troops, support the troops, don't do what you did in Vietnam, and so forth. And to this day, it has survived. I think that was a stroke of genius. But the point really is this: in Vietnam, I think. And tell me what you think. The reason why the war in Vietnam was brought to a halt by the people, it was the people said no more, right? Is because mainly the sons of middle class people had to go to the war, and so people had to skin into this, right? It is not like Ukraine. It is not like Iraq. It is not like Afghanistan, where the poor folks, are going to take the brunt of it. The vast majority of people are completely unaffected by the war. And so that was another strike. That was another genius move after Vietnam, is abolish the draft. Only the people who want to be part of this, it's going to be a professional army, right? We'll pay them. It's their job. They need to do it. And it will insulate the impact of the war. Will insulate the population from the impact of the war. And that's why I think during that time, when you have a story that comes out the Pentagon Papers. It's used by the people who don't want to go to war to resist. Use it to get this president, impeached, and have him resign, right? It's because there is skin in the game. And if the people do not have something at stake, the truth means zilch, zero, zippo. Doesn't mean anything. Who cares, right? Who cares about the truth? It doesn't affect me. Donald Trump is an idiot, blah, blah. I don't care as long as it doesn't affect me, right? But as soon as we get affected by some policy, only then will the truth matter, because we can use it to make an argument. We can use it to mobilize people who are feeling the pain as we do feel. What do you think about the need? The truth is an instrument that becomes a cudgel or becomes effective only when it is being used to rectify a situation that is impacting people, the people who are pushing for that truth to be surfaced, impacting them in a very concrete way. What do you think?
Well, two things. First, we need to maintain a culture, a political culture, that's historically literate. And in that respect, truths that don't matter now, or haven't mattered quite yet, but appear to be forming, need to be watched very carefully. We need to have this political vigilance. It's funny. I grew up in a isolated backwater called Nebraska, but we had an interesting group, quite a Capitol building, and the Capitol building had carved on it. It's fantastic structure. It's widely regarded as one of the architectural wonders of the world. I have no idea how it ended up in freaking Nebraska, Lincoln, Nebraska, but it says salvation of the state lies in watchfulness of the citizen. That's the first thing. The second thing is, you're absolutely right. If you don't have that habit, if you have a pattern of who cares, who knows, why go, it's whatever, of material obsession, personal life obsession, you don't have a civic life. You don't have civic virtue. Obviously, you're going to be in trouble until it comes knocking at your door. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the great dangers of having a volunteer army.
Yeah,
because you can say, well, guess what? They signed up for it. You can say, well. That's that's what they asked for. It's a all volunteer army. Conscription in that respect is better, because when you conscript people, you force people who otherwise would not be involved in military activity, and therefore force their families to reflect upon it.
Their friends.
Entire society to think, wait a minute, what are we doing here? And that's what happened in Vietnam. That was a conscript army, and people rebelled against that. Even in the end, my own parents did. In my family, there is a tradition where all of us are supposed to serve in the military. I was the first child that tradition was withdrawn from because of the catastrophe of Vietnam. And as my mother put it, at first we didn't get it, but then we realized the kids are right. This war makes no sense. At least that was her take on it, and we can debate whether it did or didn't. But it was because it was a conscript army. So, as strange as this may sound, I think a conscript army where people are forced to join the military, are graded in certain ways, and are literally just abducted from their lives, their families, their communities, their careers, is actually a force for peacekeeping, because it puts the government really on the spot, but with a volunteer army. So I agree with you. Unless the truth comes home, literally as I, knocked on the door there, it's a much more dangerous world. So I kind of as bizarre as this sounds, and I signed up for selective service. I actually thought about this with my parents, but I'm not signing up for this. And they're like, no, you have to do it. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to do it. And they're like, well, you can't get scholarships. You can't do this. You can't do that. I don't need scholarships. I'll get merit-based scholarships. And I did. But in the end, out of respect, I did sign up for selective service, which was just basically put me in a queue in my late teens and early 20s to be conscripted to be abducted by the United States military service. My experience with the military was very brief. I didn't go into the Army, the Navy, or the Air Force. I did briefly work as an intern for the Defense Intelligence Agency, and that's another story. And I ran like hell. These people were, they were just nihilistic. I was just terrified what I was looking at and the things that they were doing. But they seem to get off on it. Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So the 2 points then to sort of compress is that first thing. We need a constant vigilance, salvation of the state, lies and watchfulness of the citizen. So even if it's not knocking on your door, you should be wondering when it does and worried about that. And second thing, when it does, that's good news for democracy, because you can lock your door, you can go out and say stop, and you can actually do what we would hope people would do when you can. I'm not sure. I'm not allowed to. I don't want to swear on your program. Well, you can cry BS.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if that really goes to your question, but I think it does.
No, it does. It does. And I see this, for example, even in non-war issues. Like I remember in 2022, I think gas prices in the summer of 2022, gas prices were going up. The midterms are coming up, right? Biden was like, we need to do something. So he went to Saudi Arabia and he bumped the fist of that criminal there, right? And people said, wow, but you know what? I think he did bring the prices down, perhaps, and all is forgiven by the American people because their pocketbook was spared, right? So for me, if I were to say what moves the needle, is to show is to focus on what people care about, which is in this capitalist society, is the bottom line is survival. So like after 9/11, everybody rallied around because their capitalist system was being threatened and their families and so on. So they rallied, right? Same thing with Iraq, right? The troops, you got to rally around the troops, right? And Vietnam, right? Your pocket is your child, your very child, your children may go and die in the jungle, right? And so you need to go and mobilize against that, because the truth shows you that there have been manipulation. Now the truth becomes something interesting because you can use it and you can say these guys are lying to us. They're talking what didn't happen. We are not winning. Walter Cronkite is telling us we're not winning. Here are the facts. And the reason why those facts matter is because they align with what I want, which is I don't want my child to go and die for no reason, or die from far away, or get injured, and so on and so forth, right? So, for example, let me conclude with this. So, I think if we were to have, let's say, a conscripted, right, conscription army, right, people, the draft, and in fact, we innovated even more in the name of ensuring tranquility and said, there are no exemption whatsoever. Your freaking college needs to wait. Your career needs to wait. And the only exemption we will give is if you are a low-income family and your family needs you. So it ends up with all these fucking analysts. I'm sorry, now I'm swearing. All these analysts and all these people who are in the media who have children, their child is in the war. Do you think they'll cover the war differently? or do you think they'll be banging on the drums? Will Bill Kristol, if his children were going to go and perhaps die in the battlefield, would they be talking easy, loosey-goosey about the war, or would they think twice about, because they will see their children go, right? So that's one thing. And then the other innovation that I'm just brainstorming with you is this. Imagine in our tax like our form, right? There was a line item that showed you how much of your money is going to the military, right? Right. So there's a line that says, 45% of your, which is extra dollars. Those dollars are going here. I think people are like, they would compare it to the rest, right? Okay, domestic, entitlements here, Social Security, because we do Social Security, right? We have a Social Security exemption that says this money is going to Social Security. Have another box that says this money is going to the military. I think people's consciousness will be raised and their pocketbook, which is, as far as I'm concerned, democracy functions to the extent that the issues relate to you. And I think asking people to just be good, they'll try to be good if they're comfortable, and they have time to go and get involved civically. But where they will move the needle is when the flesh, is being taken away from them, the pound of flesh that they have to give in order for something that the government wants to do is able to do. What do you think about that kind of a sort of like macro strategy about how to really make changes that are right now, we're just doing things. We are supporting the war in Ukraine, and we're not worried about nuclear war with China, and we don't care because blah blah blah. Because even if the war happens, it's not gonna impact me. I don't care, right? I have other things, more pressing things to do. What if we were to go that way?
You have a very active and historically informed mind, so this is really a lot of fun. My first thought, my opening thought is we are sort of suffering a paradox there.
Yeah.
College deferments during Vietnam were radically unjust in the sense that many people were able to escape the reality. But then the irony kicks in when it was the people who were deferred took up the cause of the people who were not, and we had this generation of protest that was born out of these very universities and colleges. People who had enjoyed deferments. Generally speaking, I like your equality, your egalitarian idea. Of course, but we don't want to sabotage a society. There's times when we do have to go to war, and the easiest way to do that, and I apologize for my attempt, at least what I consider honest. The best way to do that is with the poor. And when I say best way, I mean practically, not morally. Hell no. But so we do need to get this ability to respond dramatically to military threats, and we will find that they will come again. History is not necessarily repeating itself, but it certainly, as they say, rhymes. And similar things happen over and over and over. Now, if we have an effective civic mentality, people will line up for the war. And that's what happened in Pearl Harbor. They didn't have to go out and conscript all these people. People got in line. They begged to be accepted into the military because they were so outraged at what they considered this massive moral crime against America. But there's Pax Americana, and the idea that we can induce large sections of the population to join the military for financial gain, as you said, pocketbook, and then hold them hostage to what may come soon or later, in terms of military conflict. We do want to maintain those reserves. So we have this sort of strange paradox. I believe conscription is not as bad as people think. I think it's a force of peace. I know that's an unusual view, but I also believe that we have to, in a time of no conscription, bribe people to involve themselves in the intricacies, the entanglement of military service. And we've done a pretty good job of walking that line. And yet, as I said before, the danger is because you have an all volunteer military, it's easy for many people to simply ignore the evils that we're doing with that military. And I can speak to that from personal experience, but I can also add this. Maybe this will be helpful. I can also add this. I am a firm believer in Pax Americana. I think it has done the world a lot of good, the peace of America. So we at least have to posture as if, at least create it doesn't have to be real. It can be, when push comes to shove, an illusion, but you don't want push to come to shove. We can maintain at least the illusion that the United States can step into any situation and prevail if we so choose, even though this has been abused and abused and abused, often for domestic reasons, like the Iraq War. That is a very, very powerful and good thing. They used to talk about the peace of Rome. And there's a lot of really interesting analogies. I don't have a quarter in my pocket, but if you look at the old quarter with the eagle on it, and we are very Romanesque as a society, prior to, Caesar, even though that's getting a little sketchy there too, because executive orders and things, it looks like we are at almost late stage Roman Empire stuff. But the Peace of Rome was actually very effective, and it was well played, and it fell apart under the force of what an evolving welfare state, under the lack of confidence in and interest in a sort of a fearful uncertainty about Roman security. People became complacent. It was no longer even fashionable to join the legions, the Roman legions, and they started going for what was essentially mercenaries. A lot of bad things happened with Rome, but I was always struck by the fact of the Roman quarter. And when I say the Roman quarter, I mean the American quarter. If you look on one side, it's got an eagle, and in the claws of the eagle, you go, well, what is that? Is it an arrow? If you look carefully, it is not. It's a thunderbolt. That was the symbol of Zeus, ultimate authority. And the eagle, for the Romans, was called the victory. Our founding fathers were very fluent in history, and they were very attentive to the pre-emperor Roman culture, the Republic. And it keeps popping up. It's in Star Wars, for Christ's sakes. If you flip this side, you have the picture of the emperor, which Roman coins did have impressed upon them. But our emperor happens to be George Washington. And I look at this coin, and I'm looking at the Roman Empire, and it's a coin in almost everybody's pocket in the United States. So the Roman mentality that sort of it insinuates itself in so many things American has been a force for good in the world. The question is, this is tightrope stuff. We're doing tightrope stuff when we do this. Pax Americana, as before we had the Peace of Rome. If we can keep pulling it off through a cultural stability, a balanced, intelligent, but skeptical, thoughtful patriotism, and an absolute ability to at least make the world think we could mess them up if we choose to, without abusing that power. You see how thin this rope is? I think America still has a role for the future. And I worry that if we abandon that role, if we become, if we adopt a globalist vision, it will lead to tyrannical catastrophe. We do have our Constitution. When I'm not teaching philosophy and logic courses, here's how you build a computer. Here's how the logic gates work. I'm not doing that. I'm a paralegal, and I look at the law. I'm at the Texas state constitution. I look at the federal constitution. My specialty is admissibility of evidence. All of this very cautious, carefully contrived system is such a great example. If you can keep it, and that's what Benjamin Franklin said when he came out of, the delegation left the room, and he's confronted by, guess what, the fourth estate, the press, and they ask him, well, what have you done? And he said, well, we've given you a republic if you can keep it. So this is always going to be a constant endeavor. Generation after generation after generation, the system is intrinsically unstable unless we stabilize it. And if we go for a tyrannical top-down system, it will be an absolutely horrendous form of misery. So it's hard to be human. Let's just put it that way. And it's harder to be a human society that's worth living in.
Okay. I guess let's wrap it up. I don't want to open a can of worms, but this notion of do you think that this notion of Pax Americana was a myth and that is about to die? Meaning, has the United States really been a force for good? If we look at the track record of intervention, of installing dictators, coup d'etats against democracies because they were socialist or not willing to be at the do the bidding of the American government. I've always felt when I came to this country, I don't know, 30 or 40 years ago, America does good, but then the more you consult the record, the more it feels like that was a pure myth, and that we are, thank God, feels to me, we're going to emerge from that, from having this country that calls itself exceptional, that God chose it to come here and bring about peace where peace does not exist, and usually does it through might, right? Forcing itself one way or the other, either militarily or through sanctions. I mean, Cuba has been under sanctions for 60 years plus, and it continued to be under sanctions for 60 years plus, and they are not going to submit, right? They refuse to submit until it's a failure of healing someone as small as Cuba, right? There was no imagination there from the United States. It was either you are with me or I'm going to mess with you and I'm going to destroy you. Either I'm going to destroy your economy or I'm going to destroy you physically. So this notion about Pax Americana sort of feels to me, and I may be completely wrong, that it's a myth. It doesn't exist, has never existed. Now people are realizing that we need to move on to a world where people take care of themselves, where there are regional powers, where they will negotiate things amongst themselves. We don't need a daddy or a mommy to come in and and bring the peace amongst us warring children. Like what's happening right now in West Africa. They need to figure it out on their own. They need to go negotiate, and they're creating these coalitions. They're trying to avert war, as opposed to the old way. Half of them would be the United States, half of them would be the Soviet Union, and there would be a classification of dictators. My son of a bitch and your son of a bitch are going to take over, and we're going to have stability, right? Whereas now we have a lot more chaos, perhaps. I mean, we have centers of conflict, but at least it's not a conflagration where nuclear war is going to happen because the United States and Soviet Union are clashing over Cuba. Right? We came very close to nuclear war just because of that sort of bipolarity, right? Then we went to a phase where we had unipolar, one God who's going to take care of things. That has not worked. What they did is they basically broke their word to Russia. They said, we will not infringe upon the Eastern Europe, and they are now at the Ukraine, and now we're getting into a confrontation. Whereas I see in other places in the world where, like the BRICS, they're saying enough of that system. We are going to resolve our problems amongst ourselves. We don't need somebody who's going to bring in the peace called America. We'll figure it out on our own, right? And so I see that as a hopeful development. Not that the United States is an immoral country. I think the people here are very idealistic, and they do love democracy. And then I always separate the people from the government. But as sort of a Pax Americana concept, this would be like my last point here, and I'll give you the floor. What do you think that we are still in that era of the benevolent American coming in and helping out?
Yes. Now, what Pax Americana was good at doing and remains good at doing is stopping big wars. It does not stop small wars. In fact, it often starts them. You're absolutely correct. There's no questioning that. There's a lot of abuse in the system. As for, you look at Brexit, you look at the continued disintegration of the European Union, which is continuing, and I'm actually not entirely opposed to it. What you have, well, obviously we don't want a new Germany rising. Germany has a way of starting terrible things, but anyway, but they're deeply self-aware of it now. And my experience with Germans and being in Germany was they were absolutely terrified of themselves. And they should be. But I think Pax Americana is still in place when it comes to stopping global conflagrations, global disasters of military kind, and I think that's worth retaining. But I don't believe that it's a solution for 90% of the small problems. I like that Africa is trying to figure itself out. You have to understand, Africa's kind of a mess because what happened with, and this is the way I understand it, some may disagree, a lot of people will recognize what I'm saying. When there was a period where the prestige of European nations required that they set up colonies all over the world. It was a political prestige, it was a conceit, and it was a competition. It was like a colonial Olympics.
And I think the Germans were really pissed that they were not part of that, and so they said, we'll do it to Europe. Go on.
Well, no, and as for Cuba, I have to hand it to Obama. He did try to get around stuff. He did try to reestablish relations. Cuba was a mess. We really screwed that up. We had good relations with the Castro family, and then we blew it. And then they went to the Russians. But it was a very, very close call. And the fact that John Fitzgerald Kennedy ignored the second letter sent by Khrushchev and only pretended to have the first one. I'm out. My bad. No more nuclear missiles in Cuba.
Yeah,
I mean,
smart.
that was a strike of genius, but
That's very smart. Yeah.
intelligent person, a very intelligent family. A family of drug dealers. Actually, it's interesting. They
That's true.
made their fortune off
It's a fact. Yeah.
selling whiskey during Prohibition. But back to your point. I digress, and this is my nature. But back to your point. I think America, the United States, is excellent at stopping big wars, and but the power that provides that ability is easily and frequently abused. And we have no disagreement there. And I think and it's often abused in conspiratorial ways. There will be in the councils of government and in the councils of military production and procurement. You have to understand corporations and government are definitely on the
Yes,
really
of
the same
yeah.
team. There's no doubt that they're so deeply entwined. It's I mean, what happens? Somebody is like Department of State super guy, and the next thing you know, he's working for Raytheon, and you're like,
Yeah.
huh?
And they go back in.
Yeah. It's really a uniform system of power elite, as C. Wright Mills would put it. But I do still have some confidence in the usefulness of an intimidating American presence. I think it does keep the other, what we call great powers, from going and doing really stupid things. We did save Western Europe from the Russians. We did. There's no question about it. And the Russians were not happy with it. Even though the Russian people, I don't think, had a problem with it. But Stalin had fantastic ambitions. He wanted to be basically the new Hitler. And God knows they paid the price. I mean, what was it, 23? Some estimates run up to 40 million Russians were killed in the war against Germany. Barbarossa was the invasion plan of Hitler. It was absolutely stupid. We got really lucky with Hitler. He's a great speaker. I mean, I'm not really fluent in German. I kind of get it because it's kind of a weird form of English. But when you listen to his speeches, you're like, wow. And then, but strategically, he was an idiot. And the whole Führer system was very foolish. And so, but invading Russia gave us a chance to catch up our own defenses and set things up eventually for what we call D-Day, which itself was a conspiracy. We went way out of our way to make it look like we were going to go over here, we're going to do this, it's not going to happen today, and then boom, right where we wanted it to be. So, and that was Pax Americana. So there's a good history here, and there's a bad history. When you look at Iraq, and you tally up all of the consequences of that invasion, I would argue that you're looking at 2 million consequential deaths. Now, other people would put that at 1 million. Other people would say, "Oh no, it's just 700."
But it's not over in terms of what we have right now. For example, in Western Africa, all of that is a consequence of the emergence of ISIS, which was completely, I mean, the biggest enemy that Saddam Hussein and Iraq saw were not Americans. It was the jihadists and the Islamists, because Saddam Hussein was a secular power, and they were against anything religious. They saw religion as the most threatening way to challenge their power. As soon as that regime collapsed, right, and it was very powerful in terms of containing all these rivalries, just hunting down anybody who is an Islamist and so on. As soon as that collapsed, you have ISIL, you have ISIS that sort of emerged full force. It was before that, it was Al-Qaeda before that, and Al-Qaeda stayed completely out of, if there was one place they were not going to go, it was in Iraq, because they will be hunted down by the security forces. So they ended up in Afghanistan and in Pakistan, where things are not in areas that are not really under control of the government. But you see the consequences. I'm just trying to elaborate the point there. The consequences of that war in Iraq is not only the people who died, but the continuing instability, the coup d'etats that we're seeing here in Western Africa that have to do exactly with terrorism, right? With these Islamists causing instability, and the government being too weak to fight, and the army is going in and taking over. And so the story continues, like what that guy and that guy and his clan, the guy being George W. Bush, Rumsfeld, a clique of people, a small number of people, right? They decided, and they have so much power that they could actually mobilize the whole military to do what it did. And right now we have this catastrophe that's rolling on and on and on. Anyway, but yeah, no, I totally understand your point about there's good to be played, but as long as one is very careful about how to go about deploying that mighty power that is the United States government's army and its military forces.
Well, all I wanted to add about Africa was, just to finish the thought, because the colonies were carved up in terms of the political influence of European powers, they split peoples apart. They scrambled the natural and pre-established order of cultures and political systems that were already in place in Africa. Yeah. And that it's been hell for them to try to resolve that, because they've kept the borders that the Europeans established for them. Yet it has been a real difficulty trying to realign their societies with these artificialities.
Yeah, exactly.
Didn't have anything to begin with. When the Europeans left, they left this absolute chaotic mess, and so Africa is still to this day struggling with that.
Yeah,
and it's very difficult. And you see, if you ask, well, why does America not intervene in Africa? Africa is a forgotten continent. We have to admit this to ourselves. We don't care.
Well, they do intervene behind the scenes, not to the extent.
Europeans and Americans, what we call the Western world.
But France is deeply implicated in Western Africa, big time, right? If we want to have peace in Africa, to be honest with you, I think all of these Americans and all these Western and all these whatever you call them, even the what you call them, NGOs, they need to just pack and go and let the Africans take care of themselves. They have a young population, they have energy, they have resources. There may be some chaos at the beginning, but they will figure it out. But these alliances that come in, the war industry, right? They need to sell weapons every year. They need to find wars, need to trigger wars. If these folks were left alone, right? They didn't have loan guarantees from the government to buy these weaponries, they wouldn't have the weapons. I mean, if you look at what's happening behind the scenes, right? All of this is just like the gun crisis that we have now. It's not because people have bad thoughts in their heads. It's because guns are available. Why are they available? Because it's an industry that needs to sell, and they have a lobby, and they're playing by the rules, and they have the Second Amendment, right? And so they sell their M16 to kids and so on and so forth, right? And so if you want to solve that problem, we know it's about economics. It's about people needing to sell something. Same thing with the weaponry, Raytheon and General Dynamics and Boeing Space, and they have billions and billions of dollars of contracts and need to be continuing. They need to continue selling. They need to have wars. They need to have conflicts. They need to have threats between India and Pakistan so that they arm them. They need to create tensions. It is part of the business model to have wars if these industries remain. And I think the United States, which has 750 bases around the world, right? They need to make sure that these industries remain viable, because if they start collapsing because they don't have business, who's going to furnish the American and the European armies with their armies? So they need to. So there's this dynamic that's going on that needs to be taken into consideration when we're looking at these countries that seem to be forgotten, but they're not forgotten really by the industries that are feeding them, right? Maybe the political consciousness is not aware of them, but the conflicts exist in these countries because there's weaponry. There's weaponry that's behind the scenes. And even when there's not weaponry, right? One side has the weaponry, the other side has machetes, right? So they go and massacre, right? So it creates situations where violence is the way to go, as opposed to, okay, None of the countries maybe in in Africa is able to annihilate the other one. So they need to negotiate things out. They need to talk amongst the tribes, and they have, like you said, you're spot on in terms of, there are people there who are of a clan that's respected, right? Of a tribe that's respected, right? Across countries. Like the Nigerian guy, there was a Nigerian sort of, very important figure there, traditional, and he's able to mediate because he speaks that language. He understands the sensitivities between these tribes, right? And so you see an example of where, if we get off this ideology of, okay, the East versus the West, modern versus modern, terrorists and so forth, and we just talk about how do we resolve issues amongst ourselves. They have the culture; it still remains there. These tribes have not disappeared. These traditions have not disappeared, right? It's just that they are overwhelmed by the superstructure and the whole mechanism behind the scenes of corruption, selling arms, and so on. That if you give space to those tribes, they will figure it out. They will negotiate. Africans are not different from anybody else. They don't want war. They don't want their children to die, right? And so on. So that I'm hoping that the hope I have is for things to go local, right? Things to go local so that they can have dialogues. Because when I look at my community here, I don't, even the people who call themselves Trumpists, I can talk to them, and we go and we talk, and there's nothing that stands between us, because we all like beer, and we all like to have, and go to, we all love either the Nationals, the Washington Nationals, or the Baltimore Orioles, or our football. There's a lot of things that bring us together. So if we need to resolve problems, we'll use the right words and we'll figure it out, and our humanity comes out. And so that's the hope I have, is for these big daddies to just recede, so that folks get the space to do the negotiation that I think will bring about peace down the line.
Well, so a question for you, because you've been asking so many good questions. This has been a blessing, this conversation, no doubt.
Yes.
What do you think about secessionist movements in the United States?
Like California seceded?
Yeah, like many people in my state, Texas, supports secession. It's about 40%. Sometimes it's higher, sometimes it's lower. It sort of fluctuates between 40 and 60. You have secessionist movements on the northwest coast of the United States, and there's been discussion elsewhere about California as a secessionist movement. They want to be their own, nation state out there, and a lot of this is political divisions, and also cultural divisions. They often revolve around religious ideas, and religious commitments often revolve around, radically different visions of what a good life should look like. And so I'm wondering if you would support, you talk about the big baddies. So let's go to the other end of the spectrum from Pax Americana. Would it be a value for the United States to sort of redivide itself? I'm not saying that is your view. I'm not saying it's my view.
Yeah. No, I understand. Well, let me say that for me, if you look at both world wars, I don't think they could have happened if alliances were not installed, right? If they attack you, they have attacked me, and I'm going to get into war. So I understand the logic and the rationale of alliances are they deter, right? But when they don't deter, they cause massive catastrophes. And so the question becomes, do you want to have small catastrophes, small wars, or do you want to have massive catastrophes? I'd rather have small wars, right? And small wars usually, unless they're fueled by big giants, like, for example, the war between Iran and Iraq, it was fueled by the Americans and the Soviets, right? If they were left without the weaponry, they would have figured out a way, because you know what? Iraq is mainly Shia, right? It's like 90% Shia. Shia is Iran, right? And as soon as the United States sort of said, screw this, I'm packing my bags and leaving Iraq, you have peace and harmony between Iraq and Iran. It's sort of like they are brothers and sisters because they are of the same sect, meaning, they are Shia, right? So you're not going to have war between Shia because they see themselves as a minority. So all of a sudden now you have peace amongst these two because they were given the space to figure it out, right? As far as the United States, I'd probably answer your question by looking at Europe, right? I think NATO and Europe, the European Union, all of that for me, I'd rather have small countries just with tensions between them, love-hate relationships, than these coalitions that's coalitions that become very like NATO versus Russia, World War III, as opposed to Belgium is being annoyed by the Netherlands, and we need to figure out what kind of tariffs we figured out, and we'll have a lot of little problems to solve. And usually what happens is maturity happens through solving problems as opposed to, being part of a block. I am black and you are white. I am red and you are blue, right? And so if I were to do an experiment or to answer your question indirectly, I would love for NATO to disappear. I would love for the European Union to disappear. I'd love us to have small countries taking care of themselves, let the culture take care of itself. We'll have different languages. Let's learn each other's language. Let's not have English be the dominant, right? The lingua franca, even though I love the fact that we're able to talk with technology now, I don't think you need any more, right? I work in that field, speech recognition. Right now, they're about to have a device where I'm speaking in Arabic and you are speaking in English, and I'm speaking Arabic in real time, and you're hearing my voice in real time in English. That's about to happen in the next couple of years, right?
Oh yes.
Which
yes.
It's almost here, which means that I know that's one of the things that I'm really looking forward to when it comes to technology. Is this? I'm sitting with you, we're talking, and it's through this. You talk your language, I talk my language, and your language, people would hear it in English. For me, they'll hear you speak in Arabic. That's beautiful, right? And so, for me, difference is what I admire. Differences between us and celebrating them and figuring out how to deal with them at the micro level, at the individual level, at the at the local level, municipal level. Let's not create coalitions that will create massive problems that then only a few individuals, some experts, will delegate to them. And then those guys, when they cause a catastrophe, it's a catastrophe. When they make a mistake, it's a massive mistake. When the guys wrongly decide to invade a country because they think that there's weapons of mass destruction, that's a massive mistake. That could not have happened if the United States was not as strong as that, right? And if Iraq was not as strong as that, nobody is in the position to just go and invade a country just like that. It's just too expensive for them, right? And so I don't know if I'm answering your question, but I am I'm a fan of small. I'm not a fan of big. Big is dangerous. Yeah.
As am I. You only need great nation states and Pax Americana if there's other great nation states. If we can dissolve them back into localities of self-governance, so many of our problems would this vanish.
Yeah, especially now we can communicate with each other easily. I can ping my friend that I haven't seen for 3 years, and we can have a quick conversation over Zoom, or it's easy to communicate, right? Before that, we don't know. There's mystery. Oh no, those you can demonize people, right? You can say all of them they think X, but now we can communicate, right? I can communicate with anyone. I can find out stuff. So I think hopefully the next phase is to go local and to have a lot more dialogues and to get the expert out of the equation. We don't need no freaking experts, right? We need them for specific things, right? But the talking heads, I hate nobody more than the talking heads, the people who are out there telling us how we should think. Right? Like I respect doctors and all, I definitely do that. But when it comes to telling us how the world works, I think everybody knows how the world works more or less. I respect anybody's opinion and how they see things, depending on where they come from. And I try to listen. I think if we try to do more of that, I think there'll be a lot less conflict than where we are today.
Agreed.
I'm going to give you the last word. I've abused your time so much. I apologize.
Oh, there's no abuse here. It's only been a delight. Last word. I hope we get to do this again.
You bet.
And I have found our conversation absolutely enriching. And I very much appreciate your mind and
Thank you so
your
much.
literacy and your ability to simply say in a very understandable and clear way what your thoughts are. That is a gift, and you've got it.
Thank you so much. Professor Lee Basham, thank you so much for making it time. I have been following, by the way, I'm following your interesting debate with Jesse Walker on the social epistemology reply. Is it reply in
Response. Yeah,
right?
yes.
Circ.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Circ. I'll have a link to your debate with him. Very interesting how you guys tackled the topic of conspiracy theory. I think we talked about it here, from many angles, right? We didn't just go about what does it mean. Like we talked about it in many angles, in many ways, about how our truth matters, and how truth is disassembled and obfuscated and so on. So I appreciate you very much. I appreciate your time. We definitely will do this again for sure. I think we have just started scratching the surface between you and I as far as what we talk about.
It's true. I hope we do it again soon.
Thank you so much.
A pleasure, sir.
Bye-bye. Take care.
You've been listening to Humanity 8.0 with your host, Dr. Ahmed Bouzid, founder and CEO of Witlingo. Brought to you by Rokos. Thanks for listening.